Buy the horse, she goes with it." The auctioneer laughed, and the whole barn laughed with him. 60 men in a cold sail pavilion laughing at a woman standing beside a lame gray mare with her chin up and her hands folded and her eyes fixed on nothing. You think you know how this goes? You've seen the shape of it before. A woman treated like a thing, a crowd that finds it funny, a rich man in a good coat waiting to write a check. But I'm telling you now, before any of it happens, that the man who won that mare said 7 words back, and when he was done, nobody in that barn was laughing anymore. And what he chose to do after, that changed 2 lives, and it changed the meaning of the whole word bought. Stay with me. This one is worth the whole telling. And by the way, wherever in the world you're watching from right now, let me know in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories reach. Okay, where were we? Cold. That's where we were. A February morning in a stock sale town on the high plains. Wind coming off the flats like it had a grudge, and a man named Eli Warwick standing at the back rail of the pavilion with his hat pulled low and no intention of buying a single thing. He'd come for a bridle and a used harness, $40 in his coat. And he'd have been gone before noon if the world had let him. Eli was 41 years old and had lived alone for 3 of those years. That number mattered to him the way a scar matters. He could find it in the dark. 3 years since the fever took Sarah in 9 days. 9 days from the first ache to the last breath. And the doctor 20 miles off, and the road drifted shut. He had counted those 9 days 1,000 times since, looking for the one where he could have done something different. And he never found it, and he never stopped looking. After she was gone, he did the only thing his hands knew. He worked. He ran 200 head on a hard piece of ground called the bench, a shelf of land under a red rock ridge, where the light left the stone last of anything in the county. He fixed what broke. He mended fence and cut wood and doctored cattle and taught himself the quiet, and he called it simplifying. A man doesn't need much, he told himself. A man can get his life down to a size he can carry. He had gotten his down to almost nothing, and he had convinced himself that nothing was light. He had 3 thin threads left to the world of the living. There was Harmon Teal, the old lawyer in town, who'd drawn up Sarah's papers and never once billed him for the visit after. There was the Vasquez family, 2 ranches over, who left a covered dish at his gate every Christmas, whether he answered the door or not. And there was the memory of Sarah herself, which was less a thread than a rope he'd tied around his own chest, and he did not intend to cut it, so he had no business at that auction ring. But a lame mare came through the gate on a lead, and behind the mare came a woman, and Eli Warwick's careful, narrowed life came apart at the seam. The mare was a gray, aged and thin, favoring the off-fore, the kind of animal a sale barn runs through at the end to clear the pens. Nobody wanted her. And that would have been the whole of it, except that the man who'd consigned her, a fat freighter named Dabney who'd bought a foreclosed homestead cheap and everything on it cheaper, had also, he claimed, bought the debts of the family that had lived there. And the last of that family was the woman on the lead line. Her name, the auctioneer read off a paper, was Nayeli. He mispronounced it twice. She did not correct him. She stood beside the mare in a man's canvas coat too big for her, her black hair in a single braid, and she looked to be perhaps 30. And she looked like a woman who had already decided that whatever happened next, she would not give these men. "Now this here's a special lot," Dabney said, leaning on the rail with his thumbs in his vest. "Mare comes with a hand. Girl's worked stock her whole life, so I'm told. Cooks, doctors' horses. She owes against the place. And the debt travels with her, and I'm selling the paper along with the horse. Buy the horse!" And here, he laughed and looked around to be sure the barn was laughing with him. "She goes with it. Now I want to be plain about the machinery here, because a thing like this has to hold together, or you'll rightly stop believing me. What Dabney was selling was not a person. You could not sell a person, not there, not then, and every man in that barn knew it. What Dabney was selling was a promissory note, a real debt, $90 against seed and supplies advanced to Nieli's late father, secured, Dabney claimed, by an assignment he'd bought when he took the homestead. And the ugly, quiet truth of the plains was that a debt like that, held by a man like that, was a leash. A woman alone, foreign-born by the county's lights, with no land and no kin left near. A man who held her paper could make her life a slow, grinding thing. He could dog her for work against it, garnish any wage, follow her from town to town. He wasn't selling her body. He was selling the right to own her hours until the $90 was paid, and everyone understood that $90 a woman like that would never get ahead of. That's what the laughter was. It was the laughter of men who knew exactly how much power a small debt could be, and were glad it wasn't theirs. "40 for the mare and the paper," Dabney called. "Who'll gimme 40? Silence. A man spat. Somebody made a joke too low for Eli to hear, and 3 men snickered. 25 then, sound animal under the limp, and the girl throws in for free labor. 25. Nieli looked at the mare's neck. She put one hand flat against it, not to steady the horse, but to steady herself, and the mare turned its head and lipped at her sleeve, and something in Eli's chest that he had bricked up 3 winters ago shifted a single stone loose. He heard his own voice before he decided to use it. $90, Eli said. The barn went quiet, the way a barn does. 60 faces turned. Dabney blinked, 'cause 90 was the whole of the note, more than the mare and the girl's labor were worth to him combined, and he was a man who did not trust a good thing. 90. Dabney said slowly, "You buying the horse, mister? Or you buying the—" "I'm buying the paper," Eli said. "The note. All $90 of it. Free and clear-marked paid, with the lawyer to witness. And the mare comes with it, because a debt this size ought to come with something worth having." "And the girl?" Dabney grinned. Sure, he'd trapped him. "She goes with it. That's the lot. Buy the horse. She goes with it. That's the no," Eli said. That was the word. And the next 6 after it were the ones that silenced the crowd. "And I told you they'd come, and here they are. No. She goes where she wants." He said it flat. He said it the way a man reads a fence line. And it took the barn a moment to understand him, and then it understood him all at once, and the laughter that had been building in men's throats died there, because he had just spent $90, nearly all he had in the world, and more than a month of hard beef would bring, to buy a lame horse and a piece of paper for the sole purpose of tearing that paper up. He had bought her dead in order to have the right to forgive it. And a man who does that in front of 60 other men has just told all 60 of them without raising his voice. Dabney's grin went sour. 90 cash, or you're wasting the ring's time. Cash, when the lawyer's seen it done right, Eli said. Teal's office is across the square. I'll not hand you $1 on a debt. I can't read for myself. And that was how, an hour later, Eli, Warwick, and Nayeli and the fat freighter and the gray mare all stood in the front room of Harmon Teal's law office while the old man wiped his spectacles and read the note twice through and pronounced it in his dry lawyer's way. It's a real debt, Eli, Teal said. $90. Her father's mark, properly witnessed. Dabney holds it lawfully by assignment. It's ugly, but it's law. He looked over the tops of his glasses at Nayeli. Do you understand what's being done here, ma'am? I understand, she said. Her English was careful and clear, each word set down like a stone in a wall. This man buys my father's debt. Then it is his debt to me, not this one's. She did not look at Dabney when she said this one. She did not need to. That's the size of it, Teal said. Eli counted out $90 onto the desk, and it was very nearly everything, and he did not let his face say so. Teal drew up a receipt marking the note satisfied and paid in full, and then, at Eli's nod, he took the original note itself, the paper, with her father's mark on it, and he folded it and held it out, not to Eli. By rights, it's canceled the moment it's paid, Teal said, but a person likes to hold the thing that held them. Burn it or keep it. It's yours. Nayeli took the paper. She did not burn it. She folded it smaller and put it inside her coat, over her heart, and Eli would not understand why for a long time. Dabney took his money and left cursing under his breath, and that would have been a fine and finished story, a good deed done, a bad man out $90, a woman set free, except that a free woman on the high plains in February, with no horse she could ride, no land, no kin near, and one canvas coat, is a woman standing in a lawyer's office at noon with nowhere on God's earth to go. They all felt it settle over the room. Teal busied himself with his papers. Eli turned his hat in his hands. Somewhere I can carry you. My father is dead, Nayeli said. My mother before him. My brother went north for work 2 years ago and does not write. The place they took was the place I was born on. She said it without self-pity, as a man reads a fence line, and Eli recognized the tone because it was his own. I have no place, but I do not need you to have bought me. I will not be a thing you keep. I didn't buy you, Eli said. Teal'll swear to it. You heard me. You go where you want. Then where do I want to go? She said, and for the first time something moved under the stillness of her face, something very tired. That is the question you have made for me, and it is a harder gift than the debt was, and there it was, the trap under the kindness. He had freed her into a country with no room in it for a woman like her. Setting her loose was, in its own way, another kind of turning out into the cold. Ellie looked at the gray mare tied at the rail through the window, favoring the off-four, thin and old and worth nothing to anybody who couldn't see what she'd been. And he thought of the bench, the hard shelf of land under the red ridge where the light left last, and the 200 head. He could no longer work alone as well as he pretended, and the empty house he'd narrowed his life to fit. "I run a place a day north," he said. "It's hard ground, and it's honest work, and I can't pay much because I've just spent most of what I had. But there's a bunk, a stove, a door with a bolt on the inside you'd hold the only key to. I need a hand who knows stock. You'd be working, not owing. There's a difference, and I mean it." She studied him a long moment. "The mare cannot be ridden, she limps." "So do I on a cold morning," Eli said, "and nobody shot me yet." It was the first thing he'd said that surprised a breath out of her, that might in a warmer room have been a laugh. She looked at the mare, and at the old lawyer, and last of all, at Eli. "For wages," she said. "Written down," Eli agreed. Teal, who had been pretending not to listen, drew up a plain agreement of employment right there. So much a month, room and board, terminable by either party, and had them both sign it. And he signed it as witness, and he kept a copy in his own hand in his own files. And I want you to remember that he kept that copy because it is going to matter a great deal before we're done. They went north the next morning, Eli on his bay, and Naeli walking the lame gray slow beside him because neither of them would ride an animal that hurt. It took them a day and a half instead of a day for that reason, and Eli found he did not mind the extra half. The plains ran out gray and gold ahead of them, and the red ridge came up out of the ground like a wall the second afternoon, and the sun caught it and held there after it had left everything else. "The light stays on the rock the longest," Eli said. "Every evening Sarah used to." And he stopped, because he had not said her name aloud to another living person in 3 years, and it came out of him rusted. "Who is Sarah?" Naeli said. Not a demand. A door held open. "My wife. She's 3 years gone. Fever." He looked at the ridge and not at her. "She used to sit out and watch the light leave that rock, and she said it was the rock's way of not wanting the day to end. I thought that was foolishness. I've come around to it since." Naeli was quiet a while. Then she said, "My father used to say the evening light is the day telling you what it meant. You only understand a day when it is leaving." They walked on, and that was the first thing they gave each other, a dead person apiece, laid down between them on the road, so that neither would have to pretend they'd come to this hard ground unbroken. The house on the bench was small and swept and empty in the way a house gets when a man has stopped seeing it. Eli gave her the bunk room off the kitchen, the one with the bolt, and he slept in the loft as he had since Sarah. And the first night Naeli set that inside bolt, and Eli heard it slide home through the floor, and was glad of it. Glad she'd tested him. Glad the door held. Glad she'd sleep, sure. Then began the confined, hard weeks, February into March, the season, pinning them to the place. And I could tell you they warmed to each other in a rush, but that would be a lie, and this is not a lying kind of story. What happened is that she outworked him, quietly, and he let himself be corrected. The third morning she watched him doctor a heifer's split hoof, and when he was done she said, "You pack it wrong, just that." And the next one, she showed him a poultice of things she gathered along the creek, pine pitch, and a gray moss and something she crushed between two stones, packed and wrapped in a way he'd never seen, and that hoof healed clean in half the time his ever had. He didn't thank her out loud, he just started packing hooves her way, and she saw that he had, and that was the thanks, and she took it as such. She was better with a lame animal than any man he'd known. She spent an hour every evening with the gray mare, working the bad leg with her hands, warm water, and a slow massage, and that same crushed stone smell. And she talked to it, low in her own language, a river of soft sound. And by the third week, Eli watched from the barn door and did not interrupt. That was the thing she did that I'd call her craft, if you want to name it. She paid attention to hurt things until they mended. Hooves and legs and cracked harness, and a stove that had smoked for 2 years, that she fixed in an afternoon by clearing a bird's nest from the pipe. She went through his careful, narrowed, half-broken place, and she mended it a piece at a time, not because he'd bought the right, but because she could not stand to be near a broken thing and leave it broken. And somewhere in those weeks, Eli understood that he was one of the broken things she'd taken in hand, and he did not know how to feel about being mended, having spent 3 years deciding he preferred the crack. They fell into evenings. Supper at the scrubbed table, few words. Then she'd take up her mending or her horsework, and he'd fix tack by the lamp, and the silence between them changed its texture, week by week, from the guarded silence of two strangers under one roof to the other kind, the kind that two people keep on purpose because talking would only get in its way. He taught her the English names of the tools. She taught him the words in her tongue for evening, and rock, and enough, and one night for reasons neither could have named, the word her people used for the light that stays on the stone. And he said it back to her wrong, and she made him say it until he had it, and when he had it right, she nodded once and looked back down at her work. And Eli sat there in the lamplight, feeling like a man who had found a warm coal in an ash heap he'd given up as cold. He wanted to know why she'd kept the paper, the canceled note, folded over her heart. It was the withheld thing between them, the second reason he sensed but couldn't read, and he'd learned by then that some doors you wait beside instead of knocking on. Then, on a raw evening in the first week of March, trouble came up the road from town, and its name was Dabney, and he had not spent $90 just to lose. Young Thomas Vasquez rode up from the South Place at dusk, with his hat in his hand and news in his face. Senor Warwick, the freighter, Dabney, he's been in town talking. Says the sale of that note wasn't good. Says he's got a lawyer of his own now. Says the assignment he sold you was, I don't know the word, the boy screwed up his face, void. Says the debt was never his to sell, so you're paying it don't count. So the woman still owes, and he means to come collect her paper back and her with it. He's got 2 men with him, and Sheriff Kell's been seen drinking with them. Eli thanked the boy and gave him supper and sent him home in the dark, and then he sat a long time at the table while Naeli worked the gray mare's leg in the barn, and he turned the thing over. It was a lie, he was near certain. But it was a lie with lawyer's clothes on, and out here a rich man's lie in good clothes could walk further than a poor truth in rags. Dabney would claim the assignment was defective, that he'd never lawfully held the note, that Eli's $90 had bought nothing but a worthless slip of paper, and that the real debt, always real, always waiting, still hung round Naeli's neck. And a compromised sheriff and a bought lawyer could make an ugly afternoon of that, deed or no deed. 2 days later, Dabney came, as the profile of such men requires, once to warn and once to take. He rode up the track to the bench in the middle of a gray afternoon, with 2 hired men flanking him, and Sheriff Kell trailing behind, looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere. They stopped in the yard. Eli came out onto the step with his rifle held down along his leg, not raised, just present. The way a fact is present. "Warwick," Dabney called, "there's been a mistake. That note you paid, turns out. I never had clean title to it. My lawyer says the assignment's void. Means your money bought nothing. Means the girl's debt is live. And it's mine again. I'll take her paper back, and her, along with it." Naeli came and stood in the doorway behind Eli's shoulder. She had a shotgun. She held it the way she held everything, like a tool she knew the weight of. "Come to warn me, then," Eli said mildly, "not to take. You've 2 men and a sheriff, and still you came to talk first. That tells me your lawyer's not as sure as you're saying." Dabney's face darkened. "I'm being decent. Next time I won't be. Then here's my decency back," Eli said. "You go on into town. You have your lawyer put every word of that claim on paper and file it proper with the court, and I'll have Harmon Teal meet it, and we'll let a judge read both, since you've grown so fond of the law all of a sudden. But you set one boot off that horse onto my ground. Today, and I'll take it as a man, come to steal a woman off her own hearth. And out here that's a thing a man's allowed to answer. He let the rifle be seen. Ride on, Dabney. Come back with paper. Or don't come back. It hung there." The 2 hired men looked at the rifle and at the shotgun in the doorway and at the red ridge going long with shadow behind the house, and they were being paid day wages and not enough to be shot for a freighter's grudge, and Dabney felt them cool at his flanks. Sheriff Kell cleared his throat and said low, "Dabney, he's right that it wants filing. I ain't hauling a woman off a homestead on your say-so, and no order." And that was the compromised man, showing the seam in himself, the discomfort he couldn't quite swallow, and it was enough. "This ain't finished," Dabney said, and reined around, and took his men and the sheriff back down the track. And Eli stood on the step until they were small, and then until they were gone, and only then did he feel Naeli let out the breath she'd been holding beside him. "He will come back," she said. "He'll come back," Eli agreed. "With paper this time, or with more men. We'll be ready either way." He looked at the shotgun in her hands. "You'd have used it." "I have used one before," she said, and told him no more. And there was the withheld thing again, that folded paper, that second reason, and he let it lie. That night, Eli did not sleep. He sat at the table with the lamp low, and worked it out the way she'd taught him to work a bad hoof. Slow, from the inside. Dabney's whole play stood on one leg, that the debt was still Naeli's, that she was a woman, alone with a claim hanging off her that a rich man could keep alive forever, chasing her town to town, wearing her down. As long as she stood in the world as an unattached woman with an old family debt in dispute, Dabney, or another like him, could always find a lever. She'd be running the rest of her life. And there was one thing under the law of that country that would cut that leg clean out from under him. If Naili were not a woman alone, if she were a wife, on land, that was her home in law, as well as in fact, with a husband who'd stand up in any court and swear the debt paid and the paper canceled, and Teal's own file to back it, then Dabney's claim had nothing to grab. A married woman on her own homestead, with witnesses and documents, was a wall. An unattached foreign woman with a disputed debt was an open gate. Eli saw it plain, the way you see the ridge come up out of the flat ground. And then he made himself look at the other thing, the true thing underneath the legal thing, because he would not lie to himself, and he would not lie to her. The true thing was that he did not want her to leave. He had gotten his life down to a size he could carry, and she had walked in and made it bigger, and he found, to his own surprise, that he did not want it small again. He wanted the sound of the bolt sliding home at night in a house that had someone in it. He wanted the smell of the crushed stone and the low river of her voice in the barn. He wanted supper across the scrub table for the rest of whatever he had. That was the true thing, and it frightened him more than Dabney and 2 men and a bot sheriff put together. In the morning he found her in the barn with the gray mare, and the mare was standing square on all 4 now, heeled, and Naili was just resting her forehead against its neck. Dunn and Eli stood in the door a while, and then he said it plain, in the fewest words he had. "Marry me." She went. Still against the horse. "I'll say why. Because you'd know if I lied," he went on. "One reason's the law. Dabney can't touch a married woman on her own homestead the way he can touch a woman alone. Marry me and the paper he's waving turns to nothing. That's the reason I could say out loud to a judge." He turned his hat in his hands. "The other reason I couldn't say to a judge. The other reason's that I got my life down to almost nothing and called it simple, and you come and made it a life again, and I'd rather have a full hard life with you in it than an easy empty one without. That's the reason that's mine and not the law's. I put it second, but it's not second. Marry me, not to be kept, to keep me, more like." The mare shifted. Naili did not turn around for a long moment, and when she did, there were things in her face that had been walled up as long as his had. She reached into her coat and drew out the folded paper, the canceled note, and held it up. "You want to know why I keep this," she said. "It is time you know." She unfolded it part way. "This is my father's mark. He could not write his name. This is all of him that is left in the world, this mark on a debt. When you buy it and give it back, you did not know you were giving me my father's hand to keep." Her voice did not break, but it went very careful. "I keep it because you did not have to. Because in all my life, no man with power over me ever used it to set me free. Only you. That is the second reason I would say yes if I say yes. Not the law, that a man had a leash in his hand and cut it. I have been waiting to see if you were only kind for an afternoon, or kind all the way down. You are kind all the way down. Then, yes, Eli said, yes, said Naii, but I keep my own name. Written down, Eli said. And it was the third thing they'd written down together. And the most important, they rode to town 2 days later, both of them, and the gray mare carried Naili the whole way. Sound and square, and Harmon Teal married them in his front office with his housekeeper and young Tomas Vasquez for witnesses. And he did it that same hour because Eli asked him to make it airtight and fast. Teal entered it in the county book himself, dated and witnessed, and he made 3 copies of everything: the marriage, the paid note, the canceled debt, the employment agreement, turned now into something more. And he said, "Now let Dabney file. Whatever he likes. He'll be filing against a stone wall, and I built the wall myself, and I'll enjoy watching him break his teeth on it." Dabney came back, as I told you he would, 1 week on. He came with his bought lawyer and 4 hired men this time, and Sheriff Kell dragged along, paler than before, and he came up the track to the bench with an order in his hand, meaning to make a show of it. And he found Eli and Naili standing on the step, and beside them stood Harmon Teal, who had ridden out the day before because he'd smelled it coming. And behind Teal stood the whole Vasquez family, 6 of them, and 2 neighbors from the east, all of them just standing. The small community come to say without a word whose side the truth was on. "You've no claim," Teal said, before Dabney's lawyer could open his mouth. He held up his copies, one at a time, like a man laying down cards. "The note's paid. Here's the receipt, filed. The debt's canceled. Here's the cancellation, filed. You'll say the assignment was void, that you never lawfully held it. Then you took Warwick's $90 for a debt you had no right to sell, and that's fraud, and I'll file that against you at the county seat before you've watered your horse. But it wasn't void. I checked the record myself. The assignment's clean. You're lying, and your own lawyer knows it. And even were the debt live, which it is not, it's a debt against a married woman on her patented homestead now. And you've no order that'll pry her off it, and you never will get one, because there's no judge in this district will sign it over my objection. You've spent good money to ride out here twice and look a fool in front of your neighbors. Go home, Dabney. There's nothing here for you. There never was." The bought lawyer read the papers Teal handed him and went gray and leaned to Dabney and said something low, and whatever it was the sound of a man's own hired man. The 4 riders were already easing their horses back. Sheriff Kell folded his order and put it away without being asked, and said, "That's the end of it, Dabney. I'll not be part of this no more." And something like relief came into his face. The compromised man finally let off the hook he'd hung himself on. And Dabney sat his horse in the yard, with 60 witnesses' worth of contempt aimed at his back and no card left to play. And there was no grand justice done to him, no arrest, no comeuppance, just a man who'd bet on a leash finding the leash cut and nothing in his hand. He cursed and reined around and rode off the bench for good, small against the flat ground and then gone, and the light was already leaving everything but the red ridge behind the house. And then the season turned, the way seasons do when the threat's been drawn off slow and without ceremony. March softened into a green. Nobody up there quite trusted until it held. The gray mare Sound now took Naili out to the far pastures and brought her home, and she was the best cow horse on the place inside a year, which nobody who'd seen her at that sale would have believed. But Naili had seen it, the way she saw what was under every broken thing. The 200 head came through the calving better than they had in 3 years, because there were 2 people watching them now, instead of 1 man pretending 1 was enough. The house filled up with the small evidence of 2 heartbeats in it. Her horse medicine hung drying from the kitchen beams, and the whole place smelled of pitch and gathered green. She taught him more of her words, and he taught her the running of the ledgers, and they kept the accounts together, and the wages she'd insisted be written down. She took every month and put away in a tin, hers, because a woman who has been a debt does not ever again want to be nobody's. And Eli understood that and never once suggested she stop. The Vasquez family came for Sunday suppers, now invited, and the cupboard dish at Christmas became a shared table year-round, and Sarah was not erased. That was the thing Eli had feared, and it did not come to pass. Nayeli asked about her and listened, and once in the second spring when they rode past the little fenced square under a cottonwood where Sarah lay, Nayeli got down and stood at the fence a moment and said something soft in her own language. And when Eli asked her later what she'd said, she told him, "I thanked her for teaching you to watch the light leave the rock, so that when I came, you already knew how to sit still and look at a thing until you understood it." And Eli had to turn away and look at the ridge until his eyes cleared, because he had not known until that moment that a second love could honor the first instead of crowding it out, that a mended life could hold more than the whole one had. They sat out most evenings after that, on the step, watching the light stay on the red rock after it had left the flats, the way it does the day, telling them what it had meant. She kept her father's mark folded in a small carved box on the shelf, next to nothing, because it did not need to be near her heart anymore, now that she knew the man beside her was kind all the way down. And Eli would look at his own 3-year scar of loss, and her whole life's scar of being a thing men figured they could hold, and see how the 2 of them matched, 2 people the world had tried to make small who had chosen instead to be a life. Because that's the thing I've come in the telling to believe about that cold February and those 7 words that silenced a barn. A leash cut is not the same as a gift given, and a life chosen. Eli Warwick walked into that pavilion meaning to buy a bridle, and walked out, having bought a piece of paper for the pure and stubborn purpose of tearing it up, and he thought that was the end of his kindness, the whole of it, one afternoon's decency. But a thing set free will come and stand at your door, and the question of where it wants to go is the hardest gift of all. And sometimes, if you are kind all the way down, the answer it finds is you. He'd bought a debt to cancel it, and what he ended up with was the only thing he'd stopped believing he was owed: a full, hard life, 2 heartbeats in a swept house, and the light staying long on the red rock every evening, because the day, like the both of them, did not want to end. A leash in a man's hand is only a leash until he decides what to do with it. Eli Warwick opened his hand, and everything he ever after had came from that one small opening in a cold barn in front of 60 men who had forgotten how to laugh.